Hi everyone, I'm Celine from Blue Calla Patterns. Welcome to video 3 for the Coleus bowler bag. What we're going to start with in this video is sewing our slip pockets. So you'll take both of your slip pocket pieces and place them so they are right sides together. And then pin or clip that top edge. And then we're going to sew the top edge together, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so I've used a nice contrasting thread so you can see the seam that I've just sewn. Now we're going to press that seam open first. And then you flip the pieces so they are wrong sides together, making sure these bottom edges line up, and then press that top folded edge. And now I'm just going to do some top stitching here along the top edge with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance from the top folded edge. Now that the top edge is top stitched, I'm going to take one of my main body lining pieces and I'm going to place the slip pocket over top. And then I'm just going to use some clips. You can use pins or clips just to hold that pocket in place. And then we're going to take it over to the machine and we're just going to baste the slip pocket to the main body lining piece, just along the sides and the bottom edge. And you can just use a basting stitch with 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now the slip pocket is attached to the lining and we want to separate this into two individual pockets. So we're going to fold this in half, like so, wrong sides together, and then mark the center of the pocket at the top edge and the bottom edge. And now I'm going to sew from this bottom center mark towards the top center mark. And when I get to the top, I'm going to backstitch a couple of times just to reinforce the opening of the pockets. And you use your regular stitch length when doing this. Okay, now I have two individual slip pockets. I'm going to set this aside for now. And now you're going to need all of the pieces to sew your zipper pocket. So you'll need your zipper facing piece, your two zipper pocket lining pieces, and the remaining main body lining piece. So the first thing we're going to do is attach the two zipper pocket lining pieces to our zipper. So you will need to place the zipper right side facing up along the top edge of one of the zipper pocket lining pieces, also right side facing up. Now, normally I use pins in this stage, but I did not bring my pins to the studio, so I'm going to use clips. Now, just make sure your zipper is somewhat centered along that top edge of the lining piece. And then I'm going to sew the zipper to the lining piece, starting at this end, backstitching, using 1/4 inch seam allowance from the top edge, and sew all the way across. And then when I get to this end, I'm going to stop and backstitch again. Okay, so this edge of the zipper is now attached to the lining piece, and I want to press the lining piece away from the zipper. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like now. Then I'll take the remaining lining piece and I'll place that on my work surface, right side facing up, and then place the zipper. Again, it's right side facing up, and I want that the other edge of the zipper tape to be lined up again. And this time it'll be easy to make sure it's centered because the edges here of your lining pieces should be aligned. And when you sew this in place, you're doing exactly the same thing as you just did for the first piece. You sew with 1/4 inch seam allowance, making sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so the other edge of the zipper is attached to that second lining piece, and I'm doing exactly the same thing, and I am pressing this away from the zipper. Okay, so this is what it looks like from the wrong side, and this is what it looks like from the right side. I'm just going to set this aside for a moment. And now we're going to create the opening for our zipper pocket. Now, since our zipper is 9 inches, we need to create an opening for the zipper that is 9 inches wide. Okay, so this is, I placed it 1 inch from this bottom edge, and then it's 9 inches wide. And then I'm going to make it 3/8 of an inch high. Now, if you're using a 4.5 or a number 5 zipper, you might want to make the opening of your zipper pocket 1/2 an inch high instead of 3/8 of an inch. But I'm using just a number 3 dress zipper, so I'm going to make it 3/8 of an inch high. So now you're going to take your remaining main body lining piece and you're going to place this centered, and you're going to leave 1 inch of space between the top edge of the main body lining piece and the top edge of the zipper facing. And just make sure it is somewhat centered. Okay, so when you have this placed in the right spot, you'll want to pin the facing in place. Now you're going to sew along the lines of this rectangle box. Keep your needle in the down position to help rotate at the corners, and use a shorter stitch length, not too long, 2.5, 3, something like that. Okay, so now the rectangle box is sewn. I'm going to take my pins out. Now we're going to draw some lines inside the rectangle. So I'm going to start by drawing a line down the center. And then I don't draw the line all the way to the end. I leave about 1/2 an inch. And then I draw diagonal lines from each of the 4 corners to that center line. Okay, and then I'm going to cut out these lines. I do the center line with my rotary cutter, and I'm careful not to go too far. And then I use a pair of sharp pointy scissors to do the diagonal lines. Now, the trick here to get a nice opening is to make sure that you cut as far into that corner as you can get without cutting any of the stitches. So that's why it's important to have a really good pair of scissors for this part. Okay, that looks good. So now we're going to pull the facing in through the opening we just cut towards the wrong side. And I take my time pressing this part. So I usually start with a small portion at a time, and I dampen my fingers, and I roll that seam between my fingers, and then I press. And I just do a small portion at a time. Okay, so that's what it looks like from the wrong side and the right side. So now I'm going to take the zipper with attached lining pieces, and I'm going to place this on my work surface. So your zipper pocket lining pieces are going to be wrong side facing up, and your zipper is going to be right side facing up. And then you're going to place this over top, and you want to make sure that it's properly lined up. And the way you can do that is that the edges of your zipper facing should be lined up with the edges of your zipper pocket. And then I'm going to pin this in place, like so. Make sure that your zipper is perfectly centered inside the box. Okay, now we're going to go over to the machine, and we're going to sew all the way around the rectangle box. Again, keep your needle in the down position to help rotate at the corners, and make sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so this is all sewn together. We're going to turn this over so we can see the lining pieces. Trim my threads. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the top lining piece and we're going to fold it down like so. And then we're going to pin the bottom edges together. And now we're going to sew the lining pieces together. When we're sewing the lining pieces together, we're not sewing through the main body lining piece. We're only sewing through the facing and the two lining pieces. So this and this together, but not this. And we're going to start sewing from this top corner here. We're going to backstitch, sew all the way down. Now, these are not the same size, so if you want to make it easier for yourself, you can trim away this portion. Okay, so we're going to start here, backstitch, so all the way down, stop, rotate, so across the bottom, and then stop and rotate again, and then sew here and backstitch again. Okay, so when I sew these together, I like to do it with the main body facing up, and then I can just flip it out of the way like this. And then I know where to start sewing because I want to sew fairly close to the stitching here on the top. Okay, so I'm just going to take a little bit of the mistake here that I made. I didn't go far enough to go up the side here. I'm just going to take those stitches out, trim my threads. Okay, so now I want to trim away a little bit of the seam allowance here along the bottom corner so they don't get into my seam allowance here when I'm sewing the lining pieces together. Okay, that will do. Okay, so now we have a completed zipper pocket. Okay, so now to continue, you're going to need both of the main body lining pieces and your bottom lining piece. And now you're going to see a little bit of repetition. We're going to attach the bottom to the bottom edge of the main body pieces. So this is going to be exactly like we did for the exterior. Okay, so we have the first main body attached to the bottom. And now we'll just press that away. So I'm pressing the bottom and the seam allowance towards the bottom. And then I'm just going to top stitch that seam allowance with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And now we can attach the remaining main body lining piece to the opposite end of the bottom. Okay, and then again, pressing the seam allowance and everything in this direction. And then top stitching that seam allowance with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now this section of our lining is done. We can set it aside for now. Now we're going to assemble the two zipper panels with our two zipper end panels. So the first thing we need to do is along these straight edges of our zipper panels, we're going to press 1/2 inch towards the wrong side. So wrong sides together. And I want to be fairly precise with this. So I am going to draw a line at 1/2 inch. Now, if you're using a light colored fabric, do not use a regular pen like what I'm doing right now. That would be a very bad idea, but because I'm using a dark fabric, I can get away with it. If you're using a light fabric, make sure that you're using a fabric pen. Okay, so this is the portion that I want to press towards the wrong side. So now we're going to take one of our zipper end panels and place it right side facing up. Then you're going to take one of your zipper panels And you're going to line it up along the top edge here, and you want them right sides together. And then you're going to place the second one, and you want to place them so there is about 1/2 inch of space here between the two of them. And then put them together. And then we're going to sew them together. So make sure that you backstitch here, sew across, backstitch here, keep sewing across, backstitch here, sew across, and backstitch here. So you're backstitching 4 times here because you want to backstitch at the beginning and the end of each of the zipper panels. Okay, so these are sewn together now. What I'm going to do is flip them this way. And I want the seam allowance and the zipper end panel to be pressed away from the zipper panels. Like this. And then I'm going to top stitch along the seam with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so this is top stitched, and now we're going to repeat exactly the same step that we just did. And you're going to place the other end of the zipper panels along this edge and leave 1/2 inch of space between the two. Sew them together, making sure that you're doing that back stitching 4 times. Okay, so now we're at the part where we need to assemble these two parts together to create our lining shell. I'm not going to go through it all over again. It is exactly identical to how you sewed your exteriors together. So I'm just going to briefly explain to you that you're going to mark all of your centers like we did for the exterior pieces. Don't forget your alignment marks on the side here. And then you're going to sew small portions together exactly like you did for the exterior. So there is no difference. If you want to take a larger seam allowance for the lining to make sure that it's not baggy, because it is difficult with all the corners and everything, I'm going to highly recommend that you first sew with your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and that you then increase your seam allowance if you want to, but do it after you've sewn with the regular seam allowance. Then you can increase to 1/2 an inch, or 5/8 of an inch, whatever you feel more comfortable with. And that's just so that you can really, it's easier to do that once the pieces are all assembled. Otherwise, you're going to find it very easy to create puckers, especially at those corners. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark all my centers and sew these two pieces together. If you need a reminder of how to do that, just go back to the last portion of the previous video, and all of those instructions, they're exactly the same for these lining pieces. Okay, so here is the assembled lining shell, and I'm just going to trim my seam allowance before I attach it to my exterior.
Similar to the exterior shell, do not trim the seam allowance on either side of the zipper panels. We'll need the fabric within that seam allowance to tack the lining to your exterior shell in the final video.
This is the end of this video. In the next video, we're going to sew the exterior and the lining shell together, and we're also going to sew the handles for our bag, and then we will be done. So we're nearly there. We nearly have our bag finished.